I want to welcome you back as we continue our study in the Gospel of John. And we're going to round out the 4th chapter this evening, or morning, or whatever time it is that you are gathering with us and following along in this study. So in John chapter 4, we have now gone through most of this chapter. We've discussed the meeting with Jesus and the woman at the well, and the impact that Jesus' presence has on the local Samaritans, and the kind of barriers and boundaries that were being broken racially, ethnically, in terms of gender, as Jesus was reaching out to these people and revealing himself as the Messiah. And we see the kind of faith that they expressed in him as Lord and Savior because of it. Well, now we are going to look at the last portion of chapter 4 in John. So this is going to be verse 46 through verse 54. We're going to see Jesus returning to Galilee, and we're going to see John give us a synopsis of another miracle that he performs, and we'll unpack some of the elements of this. So I invite you to turn with me, if you haven't already, to John chapter 4, and we're going to read verse 46. So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. And when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." And the official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." And the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. And as he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. And so he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live," and he himself believed, and all his household. And this was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. And so, as we look at this, we see a fairly brief story of Jesus healing a man's son, but we see a little bit of a development here in the way that Jesus heals this man's son that changes or is a little bit different from some of his other miracles, where we see him physically present and interacting with the person that he's healing. In this case, we see that will not be what happens, that he is not physically present, and nevertheless there is a miracle of healing that occurs. So, as we see this, remember that in the previous verses, Jesus has been traveling from Judea, the southern end of what we would understand as Israel, and he has traveled from there, and he has made his way through Samaria, and he has encountered the Samaritans there and borne witness of himself to them. And then he is now in Galilee, in the kind of the northern region of what we would understand as Israel. And so he is in this region now, and this is where we will see that Jesus spent a large portion of his ministry, and it's a place where his disciples, a region where they were generally from, and that as we look at this, we see that Jesus has his most positive reception in that northern region, which is a little bit unexpected because the more devout religious region would be the southern end around Jerusalem, and the attitude of those in Jerusalem was to be seeking out the Messiah, and that they were certainly preaching that message and expecting that, and yet when the Messiah came, they rejected him by and large. Obviously not everyone, but we see many of the local powers that be in Jerusalem certainly did reject Jesus. And yet in Galilee, a place that was seen as kind of being backwards or being, in terms of religious fervor and an attitude there that they were looked down upon compared to the Jerusalem population of Jews. And nevertheless, it's the people in Galilee that seem to receive Jesus in a more positive manner than those who were in Jerusalem. And so as he makes his way back to Galilee, we see him encounter this man. Now, one of the things that we find out is that the word of Jesus traveling is going ahead of him. Right? That there is word, Jesus has made a name for himself in Jerusalem. He has been performing miracles and teaching, and there are people who have gone to the festivals traveling from the region of Galilee, and they have encountered Jesus there, and of course the word of his miracles and the things he's doing is going back with him. And so as people hear about Jesus, there's a lot of talk and discussion and rumors going around about who Jesus might be. Is he the Messiah? Is he a prophet? Who might he be? And so we see that the rumors and the discussion around Jesus is going ahead of him back to this region, and people begin to hear that Jesus is coming back to Galilee, and so they are going to try to rush out to meet him. And so we see that the word is spreading in that sense. Well, we find that he goes to Cana in Galilee, and John reminds us this is where he had made the water wine. Now, clearly, this is a miracle or something that really signified the start of Jesus' ministry, and so it's reflected here in the way that John speaks of Cana, to understand that in John's view, and probably in the disciples' view, this was what they always remembered Cana for. That Cana was a relatively small town. There wasn't really a whole lot going on in it. It's not a significant town, in terms of a broader picture. However, it's very significant to their faith, because it's where Jesus revealed himself by turning water to wine. And so John here is linking that to help us understand Cana is always remembered by John, and Cana is always remembered likely by the disciples who were present as well, that Cana is where Jesus performed the miracle of water to wine. And so this kind of transformed their memory and their association with Cana, as they always remembered it as being connected to that miracle. So they are in Cana again, and so John is reminding us where that is. And at Capernaum, we learn that there was an official whose son was ill. Now, Capernaum is something like 20 to 25 miles away from Cana. It's not very far, but it's if you're going to walk it would take you a little while to get there, to travel back and forth between them. Both of these towns are kind of in the region of the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum being very close, kind of on the coastline more or less, while Cana is a little bit further removed from the coast. But the distance between these is not too significant. And so we see that word has traveled. So Jesus has stopped in Cana, it seems, along with his disciples, and he has stayed there. But in Capernaum, there is word that has gone out that Jesus has apparently been there. So it's kind of an interesting thing. This tells us that there's probably some passage of time that we're not really being informed of. For word to get to Capernaum that Jesus is staying in Cana means that he probably has been there at least a day, maybe at the very least, maybe a couple days, but that he is in Cana and he has stayed there. He's been there long enough so that people who are in Cana could travel to Capernaum and get the word out to say, hey, Jesus is back again. That man that was in Jerusalem that's been performing these miracles and all of this, to say, hey, he's in Cana again, and they are now, there are people who are going to be seeking him out, who are going to be traveling from the nearby countryside to try to find him and to seek him for teaching or for miracles and things of that nature. Well, here we see that one of these individuals is an official whose son was ill, and he is apparently living in Capernaum, or he is staying in Capernaum, or whatever the case may be. That's where his family is from. Now, he is going to travel to Cana in order to petition Jesus to step in and to save his son who is ill. Now, we don't know specific details too much about who this official is. The word here is kind of related to the word for king in the Greek, and so it's suggested that he is linked then probably to Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas was one of the sons of Herod the Great, who was the ruler, or the provincial governor, if you will, or the ruler of the regions of Judea and all of that when Jesus was born. And so his son now, one of his sons, took over Galilee. Herod actually just had spread out the jurisdiction of the land that he controlled or was in power over underneath the greater headship of Rome, that he had split that up in different sections among his own sons. And Herod Antipas was one of them, and he was in control of the region of Galilee, which is where Cana is. So we see that this is an official who is probably connected in some way to Herod Antipas. And so he is someone who is in his court. We don't really know a specific title. The title that is used here is kind of generic. So we would say he's probably a servant or connected to, works as a part of the court for King, or for Herod. He's referred to as King Herod. He wasn't officially a king in any sort of Roman sense. He didn't really have that title, but he was referred to with that moniker at different times. And so he is connected to him in some way, although we don't know specifically what his position or title might actually be. Either way, it doesn't really matter what he is specifically, other than to know that he is an important person who has connections to Herod Antipas. Now, his son is ill, and so naturally he is afraid that his son is going to die, and so he wants to petition Jesus to step in and do something for him. Now, we see again that word travels, and so when he hears that Jesus has now left Judea and is up in Galilee and is in Cana, he's going to go ask him what to do. And he basically asks him to come down and heal his son. Now, this is just kind of a little bit of an extra piece of information that's not really critical to understanding the story. But when it says to come down and heal his son, that one's an interesting turn of phrase there, because Capernaum would actually be slightly north of Cana. That if you were looking at how they work out, that Capernaum is kind of in a northeastern direction from Cana. In that way. And so you wouldn't really think of coming down in our ideas of looking at a map. You'd say, well, he's kind of going up a little bit on the map. But for them, they would say going down because Jerusalem is the center of their life. And so if you are going away from Jerusalem, you're going down. If you're going toward Jerusalem, you're going up. And so even though he's actually not really heading down, so to speak, he is heading away from Jerusalem to get there. And so as the way that the Jewish people would talk about it, they would say he is going down in that way. So he is asking him to come to Capernaum, to travel that distance of 20 to 25 miles, somewhere in there, and to say, hey, could you come heal my son? Would you come back with me and do that? Because he's at the point of death and he's worried, as a father would be, that his son is going to die. Well, we see Jesus give this response. He says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. This is kind of an indictment on him, but also on others in his background, so to speak, to kind of say this not just at this man, but in other people who have a similar background to him. That could include other people who are in the court of Herod, but it probably has more of a broader sense of understanding that he's making this as a statement against Jews. That he's saying that the Jews are not going to believe him unless they see signs and wonders. Now, the reason why we can make this comparison and try to put those ideas together is because we notice that when Jesus had encountered the Samaritans, he doesn't really give any miracles to them. Right? He doesn't perform miracles before the Samaritans. He just speaks to the woman at the well, and based on his knowledge and of her and his discussion, she comes to understand that he's the Messiah. And in the same way, when the Samaritans meet Jesus, that as he stays there, they believe based upon the word that Jesus spoke. So the woman believes because of what Jesus says, and the Samaritans in the town believe because of what Jesus says. It's not because they see a miracle. They're not looking for him to perform some sign in order for them to believe. They just take him at his word. And so this kind of becomes an indictment on the Jews who constantly refuse to accept Jesus based on his word and say, well, show us a sign or a miracle. Well, of course, we see that many times over that the Jewish leaders in particular say, well, give us a sign or miracle, and we'll find that Jesus did tons of signs and miracles, but they wouldn't count them. They would find some other reasoning and say, well, that wasn't really a miracle because he was breaking the law, or he's not doing this as a representation of God, it's the devil at work in him, or something along those lines. So they kept calling for a miracle for him to prove himself, but they wouldn't believe him anyway. So Jesus is kind of giving an indictment, a little bit of a statement of judgment here, saying, the Samaritans believed Jesus for what he said. They took him at his word, but the Jews are asking for him to do something to prove it. And so he is kind of pointing out and saying, your faith is limited, your faith is weak, because you're not taking me for what I'm saying, you're requiring me to go and actually do something to prove it. Well, the official, response kind of glosses over that because he's a distraught dad. He's not concerned about getting into a discussion on that. So he says, well, sir, just come down before my child dies, please. He's distraught and he's begging him, saying, please do something to help my son. Well, then we see Jesus saying, go, your son will live. There's no indication from Jesus that he's going to go back with the man to travel to Capernaum to heal his son. He's not going to go do anything like that. He's not going to lay hands on him or pray over him or anything of that sort. He just tells the man, you can go, your son is going to live. Right? In other words, he's indicating that he can heal this man's son without actually being present. He doesn't need to be next to the boy in order to cure him, in order to bring him back to life. Right? In order to restore him to his health. He's saying, I don't need to be there. I can heal your son from a distance, just with the word that I speak. And so the man believes the word that Jesus speaks and goes on his way. So he leaves at that point, going back home, of course, anticipating and hoping that what Jesus has said is true, that his son is not going to die as a result of the illness that he is currently enduring. Well, we find out in verse 51 that as he is traveling back home to Capernaum, that his servants come out to meet him. They rush out and they meet him on the road. Somewhere along that way, before he gets back to Capernaum, he encounters his servants, and his servants give him the news and say, hey, your son is healing. Your son is getting better. He's not in the condition he was before, and we've seen him have a marked improvement over the past time. He's doing well. And so the servants have come out and have met the father on the way back to Capernaum. Now, the father here trying to kind of piece these things together and figure out, okay, was this just a coincidence? Was my son already doing better before I left, or after I left, so to speak? Was this something that was related to what Jesus said? He wants to investigate this a little more and find out what's going on. So he asked the servants, he says, so when did he begin to get better? And the servants say, yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. So they say he started to get better at the 7th hour yesterday. Now, for us, again, we wouldn't think of the 7th hour in the same way that they are, but for them, the 7th hour by Jewish standards would be 1 p.m. So they're saying at 1 p.m., your son began to get better. Now, we don't know exactly what time this exchange is happening. If the man left immediately, obviously traveling 20 to 25 miles would take a while, and he's not going to go the full length because his servants meet him. Now, for us, the journey probably shouldn't take long enough to be the next day by our standards, but according to Jewish standards, the idea of a new day starting was like in the evening, that a new day would begin in the evening hours, like around 6 p.m. or something, not like we would do where we'd count like midnight being the marker of a new day. So they could speak of this and say, your son was getting better at 1 p.m. yesterday, which for us we would think of as being 1 p.m. earlier in the same day. But by their standards, obviously they kept track of time a little bit differently than we would. Now, as we look at this, then the father begins to piece together this information, and he puts it together, and he realizes that was about the time. 1 o'clock was the time when he was speaking with Jesus, and when Jesus had said, "Go, your son will live." And so he understands that the son started to get better at the moment when Jesus had told him, "Go, your son will live." And he understands that Jesus was able to heal his son, and he was able to do so from this distance. That it was all he had to do was speak the word. He didn't have to be present. He didn't have to do anything, to lay hands on him or anything of that sort. All he had to do was to speak the word, and his son was healing. And so this emboldens the faith of the father even more. He realizes who Jesus is and the power that Jesus has. And so at that point, he believes. His faith has been confirmed. He now trusts and understands that Jesus has the power to save his son, that Jesus is the Messiah, and he believes that is the case. He believes now who Jesus claims to be. And not just him, but his entire household. His wife, his son, any other children that may have had, the servants in his household that would probably be included in that. We see that because of the leader, as the head of the household, that his household now believes and believes that Jesus is the Messiah because of what has happened at this point. And so this then, John tells us, was the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. And what this is meaning is, it's not the second sign or the second miracle that Jesus ever did. There have been more than that John has recorded himself. But he's saying this is the second time that Jesus, upon leaving Judea and going back to Galilee, performed a sign on his journey back. Right? He had done that at Cana the first time on his way leaving Jerusalem and heading north into Galilee. He had stopped in Cana and had changed the water to wine at the wedding. And now, again, returning from one of the feasts, one of the reasons he was down in Jerusalem, he is going back up into Galilee, and he again performs a sign. And this takes place he is in Cana. The person who was healed is in Capernaum. And this, then, John tells us, is another one of those signs. It's another indication of who Jesus is, his power, his authority to heal and to transform. And so we see that taking place. And this is a further development, understanding that Jesus has the power to speak the word, and that brings about healing. That Jesus doesn't have to physically be present to do something like that he can speak the word. Even if he is physically absent, he has the power to heal people nevertheless. And so this John takes note of, and the disciples would take note of, to understand the power that Jesus has. And this confirms, again, that he is truly the Messiah, being able to do something that no one should be able to do unless they truly are the Son of God. And so that's what we see being described here at this point. And that is where we will leave off as we get ready to jump into chapter 5, and we see yet another time where Jesus is attending one of the feasts in Jerusalem. And he carries out yet another example of his miraculous healing, demonstrating and confirming the claims that he has made about himself to be the Messiah. So I thank you for joining with us again. I look forward to having you join with us as we pick up in chapter 5 at the next time that we meet.